Everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Russell Baker. I'm the Manager of Media Relations at the City of Toronto. I'm pleased to be here today with you to share some details on the city's winter services plan for people experiencing homelessness in Toronto. So we're going to start with a brief presentation from Gord Tanner, who is the General Manager of Toronto Shelter and Support Services, and then we're going to be hearing from Councillor Alejandra Bravo, and after which we'll take some questions from the media as well. So at this point, I'd like to invite up Gord. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today as we release plans for our upcoming winter season for people experiencing homelessness. We know how important it is to ensure people have access to warm places indoors, not just during the winter, but year-round, and that's why our winter services plan is just one piece of the work that's underway at the city currently to ensure the shelter system is responsive to those in greatest need. Before we get into the details of this year's plan, I want to recognize and thank all of those individuals that play a role in providing service to people experiencing homelessness, whether our shelter workers, our outreach workers, faith-based leaders, community members, and neighbors. It's important that we recognize the efforts of these individuals and we thank them for their efforts. Toronto continues to see extreme pressures on our emergency shelter system, from the inflated cost of living, from a lack of affordable housing, from inadequate, desperately inadequate wage and income supports, and an increase in the number of refugee claimants arriving in Toronto. We've seen an increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness over the course of the last year, and we've seen an increase in the number of people living outdoors and at encampments, and those numbers are higher than they've ever been before. We know demand for shelter increases in winter when cold weather makes living outside more challenging and dangerous. And we're doing everything we can to accommodate this growing need, but the shelter system is operating at capacity each night. And this capacity challenge here in Toronto is not unique to Toronto. Municipalities right across this country are struggling to shelter and house people. As of October 2024, the city is accommodating more than 12,200 people each night, and that's up from 10,700 people last year. There are more than 9,500 people in the shelter system and another 2,600 people being housed or accommodated in bridging hotels. Of those, about 53% in total are refugee claimants. Each night, there are approximately 223 people that call our central intake line that we're unable to match to a shelter bed. We have and will continue to add as many spaces as we can to the shelter system, a shelter system that's the largest in Canada per capita and provides more beds than any other Canadian city. Since 2021, the capacity of the shelter system has grown by 50%. But homelessness is not solved by just adding beds to a shelter system. Complementary efforts are needed. More supportive and deeply affordable housing, more robust income supports so people can feed, clothe, and shelter themselves, social supports, mental health supports, supports for people who use substances, and better coordination from all levels of government is also badly needed. This work is about people. People we see going to desperate lengths to keep themselves warm in the winter using propane, even though there are fire and risk hazards. People bundled in doorways or on transit. People presenting at hospital emergency rooms or lined up outside of our outreach service offices. These are our friends, these are our family members, these are our neighbors, and we must do our best to assist. The services provided by the city, as well as our many community partners, are helping, but more is needed, and more help is especially needed as we approach the winter months. Each year, as you know, we develop a winter services plan, and this plan expands our services from the middle of November through to April, mid-April of next year, and the goal is to provide as many indoor warm spaces as we can. Preparation for this year's winter plan started in April of this year, and we examined what worked well from last season and what needed to be improved. And this includes signing many multi-year leases with community partners and churches to ensure that our warming center spaces are consistent and as cost-effective as possible. To meet additional needs during the periods of cold weather when health and safety risks for people experiencing homelessness are higher than normal, this year's winter plan includes the following measures: maintaining and adding space in the shelter system, activating warming centers, implementing an extreme weather response such as enhanced street outreach and opening surge capacity sites, and finally, opening new supportive and social housing units. We saw success last year with how staff added beds to the shelter system, and so this year we're doing that again. We'll add 530 spaces by expanding existing shelter programs and opening dedicated 24-hour respite sites. This includes, again, partnering with Exhibition Place to make 240 beds available at the Better Living Center. Those beds will open in mid-December, and we'll ramp them up to about 300 in the following weeks. Warming centers are another critical component of the annual winter services plan. They add complementary capacity to the shelter system during periods of cold. They provide a place to rest, access meals, washroom facilities, and referrals to emergency shelters where additional supports are available. We're continuing with the revised warming center activation criteria that was put in place last year. Specifically, warming centers will open when the temperature dips below -5 degrees Celsius, or when Environment Canada issues a winter weather event warning. Our warming centers are activated and they remain open 24 hours a day until temperatures increase and the warming centers close. This winter season, we'll be offering 218 spaces at 4 warming centers, up from 170 last year. Additional measures will be put in place when temperatures dip below -15 degrees Celsius. Additional Streets to Homes teams will be deployed to encourage people to come indoors, and those teams all winter long will be distributing blankets, warm winter clothing, and sleeping bags. But in extreme cold, we will also open an additional warming center and temporary contingency spaces across the shelter system for an additional 164 spaces. Emergency shelters, warming centers, and respites are not the answer to the housing crisis. We know the best long-term solution to homelessness in Toronto is permanent, affordable housing with supports to provide people with the dignity and roof over their head that they deserve. During this winter season, the city anticipates opening 286 housing units, which will become available for tenanting to move people off the streets and out of the shelter system, and thus create more space to bring more people indoors. The measures being announced today will result in approximately 1,200 shelter and housing spaces in total. We're also working with our providers to extend operating hours at a number of daytime drop-in services throughout the winter months. And we know that people will seek shelter on public transit, so our Streets to Homes team will continue to provide dedicated outreach on the transit system. And this is in addition to the outreach work done by our partners at Loft Community Services. The needs of those experiencing homelessness evolve, and thus the winter services plan will also continue to evolve as we monitor demand and search for appropriate locations to add capacity. This year, we're also prioritizing refugee houses to support newcomers who may arrive in Toronto with no place to go. The city is providing funding to create 200 new spaces at refugee houses across Toronto. 2 locations have already opened, with more locations expected to come online in the coming months. More than half of the people, as I mentioned, accessing the emergency shelter system are refugee claimants, and refugee houses, which are smaller and provide refugee-specific social supports and connection to settlement services, are proven to lead to better outcomes for clients faster and at less cost than traditional shelter models. Toronto's homelessness service system is funded with an investment of over $780 million annually. But the services needed to care and to house everyone waiting for a space is far greater. We are grateful for the strong partnership of all orders of government and the partnership that they've shown in the last couple of years, and we look forward to continued collaboration in the future. We welcome the most recent allocation of the 2024 funding through the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. Funding through that program will support 1,700 households move into private market housing and create more shelter system flow so we can serve more people. To help more people get housed, we urge the federal government to launch the 4th phase of the Rapid Housing Initiative. It's been a very successful program that creates new supportive and rent-geared income housing for people who are homeless. Also, the federal government announced $250 million in its spring budget to help respond to encampments nationally. That investment was conditional on the province matching the funding. And so in Toronto, we are very eager and awaiting an update on how that money will be made available and flow. Assisting people in encampments has become a much bigger part of the work that we do. And this year, through our outreach work, we've referred 560 people to indoor accommodations from outdoors, and we've housed 226 people from the street. But even with this work, more and more people are entering homelessness. Help is desperately needed. The long-term sustainability of Toronto's shelter system is also a significant area of focus for the city. A strategic capital plan for shelter infrastructure was approved by Council in November of 2023. The Homelessness Services Capital Infrastructure Strategy is a 10-year plan to improve shelter system stability, achieve cost savings, and be more responsive to the needs of people experiencing homelessness. One pillar of the strategy will assist the city to transition out of high-cost shelter hotels and into owned, purpose-built spaces that are designed to better meet the needs of people who are homeless. The goal of the 10-year strategy is to build 20 permanent, purpose-built designed shelters for increased safety and cost savings. These investments will help us care for those in need for decades to come. The city right at this moment is finalizing plans for 6 locations of these first new shelters, and more details will be available in the coming weeks. Homelessness is a very complex issue with many contributing factors, but we have a responsibility to do all we can right now and continue to build upon the efforts we're making. Solutions require ambition and partnership. This work requires willing hands and kind hearts, working together to provide these support services. The city's goal is to continue to put people first, at the center of all that we do, to care for people this winter as we work to move them into housing. We're committed to continuing this critical work, and we thank the residents of Toronto for their partnership and patience because we know we are stronger together. I'll now pass the floor to Councillor Bravo.
Thank you, Gord. I think you can see that staff have worked really hard this year, again, to make sure that we have more safe indoor spaces and that resources are being stretched to the maximum, because shelters are about the first step to a permanent home, which is the shared interest of everyone within the City of Toronto, public service, and on City Council. Some significant changes have taken place in the last couple of years. Last year, remember, we adjusted the temperature threshold for opening of winter spaces from negative 15 degrees to negative 5. There's been an investment in 24/7 respite spaces. The opening of the Better Living Center brought more spaces. So you can see that a number of things have taken place, and one of them is to share more information sooner. So we're sharing this plan now in mid-October. The season will start earlier in terms of support and will go longer into the end of April, and that means more protection for people. It also means that we're actually making a move that's really important to me personally. I've advocated for the expansion of daytime drop-in hours. As many of us know, unless there's a place for people to go, they may not be able to be at a shelter all day. They need to go out into the street. Or people that need respite from living outdoors need to come in, have a warm shower, have a meal, get the services that they need and get connected, and ultimately they find connection there. And that's really important, particularly for a population that has the highest needs. We're building out the refugee house model, as has been shared, and I think this is really important because this is the best value in terms of investment from the public, for both for refugees and for everyone, and for if we think about the resources that we have within the City of Toronto. Refugees come out faster, better integrated, with more resources, with their papers processed, and so that's a proven decades-long model that we've been working towards buttressing and enabling. And I can say that having convened senior leaders across multiple divisions, every effort is being made to remove barriers to the expansion of that solution. But we know that more needs to be done. No one is saying, I think, here that the problem will be solved. With more than 220 people being turned away every night from shelters, we know that there's massive demand, and nobody should be left outside, because a roof is the best way to get better. We're building out the shelter system at the same time with the Homelessness Services Capital Infrastructure Strategy, and I am encouraged and delighted to know that 6 new shelter locations are being brought on. They're going to be intentional, they're going to be right-sized, and there will be a lot of work to make sure that when they are built, there will be a welcoming community there for those new shelter residents on their way to their next home. Ultimately, the primary solution is housing. And so it's a good news that the provincial and federal government have finally released the COB funding this month after 6 months of dedicated municipal advocacy by the public service and by the members of the public, not just City Council, which has approved motions requesting that Canada-Ontario housing benefit. Without that gap, we would have been able to potentially house 1,800 households. And what a dent that would have made into the problem that we're facing. There are people who are currently in shelters and making their way through encampments inside could have been helped. And so we need to accelerate that. And one of the challenges is that we know what the allocation is until April 2025, but it's not possible to plan, as you can see, to predict and to provide the support that's needed without a long-term commitment. I want to say that, you know, the federal funds for the encampment help needs to come quickly to the City of Toronto and to all municipalities. We also need to prioritize securing that capital investment that's been requested of the federal government so that we can go ahead with our capital shelter plan. The situation that cities are grappling with, this has been decades in the making. Since the 1990s, the provincial and federal government have abandoned its responsibility to supply affordable housing and particularly supportive housing. And so what we're grappling with in our city parks and our city streets and what people are facing as they get more ill because they are homeless is a lack of those supports. We need higher incomes for people, a roof over their head, and yes, for many people, it's health care that they have been denied, either mental health or physical health care. And that could include any number, including treatment for those that seek it. We need all partners at the table, and clearly the City of Toronto has been all in and will continue to be all in. I think that what we know is that the best prescription for anyone who's out there suffering with any kind of affliction and to build a good life is a roof over their head, and a shelter space is the first step to the ultimate goal, which is a permanent home. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. Councillor, so we do have people who are watching online as well. So my colleague Elise is here for those who want to ask a question. So friendly reminder to please ask your question, one follow-up question, and say your name as well, please. Elise?
Good morning. My question's for Mr. Tanner. This time last year, it was difficult for the city to predict what the demand would be going into the winter months for the shelters. I'm wondering, is that a challenge going into this winter?
Yeah, I think estimating what future demand looks like is complicated. However, we know that there are thousands of households across the city that are struggling with respect to affording their rents, and so we have to continue to do as much as we can to prevent those folks from falling into homelessness and build the best response that we can. but very difficult to forecast demand.
I also wanted to ask about your comments for the refugee homes. You mentioned 2 are already available. You're working to get additional spaces available soon. Do you have a timeline and how many spaces that might provide?
So it would be 200, as quickly as possible. We hope to open them as soon as possible as well, if not by the end of this year, by the first quarter of next year.
My question is for Gord as well. So the plan talks about respite spaces. As far as I'm seeing, it's only the Better Living Center that's listed. How many respites will open, and what locations are those?
So we have 3 in total, the biggest one being X Place at the Better Living Center. Covenant House will be opening a smaller respite for young people, and Homes First will be opening a respite for refugee claimants if we're in need of that. We'll also be maintaining the 24-hour respite that we opened last year at the Scott Mission. It's been kept open throughout the summer, and it will continue to operate throughout the winter months as well.
And with the COHB funding, when did that land, and what is the actual dollar allocation compared to last year?
Yeah, so it just landed, at the end of September, maybe early October. The total amount, I'd have to confirm with you, but I believe we're in the range of about $12 million total for the COB benefit this year. 19.6, my apologies. The biggest component of this, though, is we estimate it will help 1,700 households between now and the end of March. And certainly this is funding that we could have utilized and been waiting for since April of this year.
Hey, Gord, my question's also for you. Last year, particularly, we saw a lot of people waiting outside the intake center, a lot of refugees waiting outside the intake center. Is the hope that these new refugee-specific homes will help alleviate that process, or will at least some of that still linger as the months go on?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping that these new sites will definitely assist us. But in addition to that, and the Peter Street Respite is a very busy place. People continue to arrive there directly from the airport. We continue to wait for the opening of a regional reception center that would provide sort of that first line of support and dignified welcome for people who are arriving. And that will be sited in Peel, but we're still waiting for an opening date of that reception center.
Well, that was my follow-up. Where are we with the opening of that center? I know the mayor has talked about it. It's in the works, but any update on where we are with that?
So I don't have a confirmed date at this point in terms of when that site will open, and that's something that we're very focused on in terms of added part of our service system that would make an incredible difference to people as they're arriving.
Sorry, also just with refugees, we know last year, as there was that mass influx, a lot of churches, mosques, other institutions took a lot of refugees in at their own cost. Will these refugee-specific houses help alleviate and take the pressure off of those institutions as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're hoping to continue to build the capacity of the refugee-serving sector here in Toronto. We anticipate that there will be continued demand for those types of services, and so as Councillor Bravo mentioned, these smaller community-based houses provide the best, again, community-based support and welcome to people and allow them to get integrated much more quickly and in a successful way in the city. So definitely continuing to build out that capacity, waiting on both the reception center and a regional approach to this issue, but Toronto will continue to play a role here as well.
So the plan also talks about the new supportive and social housing units that are expected to open through the winter. Can you give us some examples of some of the locations?
Yeah, well, in fact, the most exciting one right now is 90 Dunn, which is, as you know, probably a partnership with University Health Network and the City of Toronto and Fred Victor Centre. That property will start to tenant at the beginning of November and continue to accept people over the following weeks. And we'll provide life-saving support to people that are high users of the healthcare system and who are experiencing homelessness. So that's one example. We'll also be working with our partners at Toronto Community Housing to continue to support people who are homeless to move into vacancies within that portfolio. And I believe we're still tenanting at the Bond Hotel, also run by Dixon Hall, which was a shelter hotel but has now been purchased by the city and will now be permanent supportive housing.
And Gord, just with back to the refugee-specific homes, is there an additional cost for that? How much is it, and is that money already baked into the budget?
So, you know, we are and thankfully getting support from the federal government to support some of these refugee response initiatives, and part of that funding will support to pay for the expansion of refugee houses in Toronto.
Okay, thank you very much, Gord and Councillor Bravo. Appreciate it, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.